Good evening. I'm Lori Robichaud, the Executive Director of La Grua Center. It's my pleasure to welcome you to another of these new adventures we are on, engaging our community via programming on the Zoom platform, this time as part of our Behind the Curtain series. I come to you from La Grua's office, and our program director, Kelly Rusherall, is behind the scenes from her home office. I need to start with a little housekeeping. We always like to take questions from the audience, so please find Zoom's Q&A feature either at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on your device. We welcome your questions after Pam and I have chatted a bit. Kelly will join us then and read them so Pam can answer, so fire them off. This is also the time when I take a moment to thank the many people who donate to La Grua Center's annual fund each year, and I know some of you are with us tonight. Those gifts are a big part of making our year-round programming possible, and those annual fund dollars matter more than ever during this time of COVID, when many of our usual activities are curtailed and we can't gather together in person. As you may know, we continue pivoting to this digital environment for our programs, like with this talk, and urge you to check out our YouTube channel for recordings of our Music Matters concerts, where the artists perform in an empty La Grua Center, but we then post their videos. We also have videos of art activities for the kids and grandkids in your lives, and this month's art exhibition of artists from Stonington's Lord's Hill Studio are on Google. You can find links to all of them on our website. So now on to tonight's presentation. At a time when our country is besieged by very serious topics, we hope tonight we can provide you with a bit of diversion. Is anyone out there not going to smile when you hear the word Muppet? Our conversation tonight is with expert puppeteer Pam Arciero, whose bio is in your ticket link. And we are going behind the curtain with her to chat about her career and adventures on Sesame Street. Pam is the first person I think I've ever met who is from Hawaii, but she spent much of her career here in Connecticut, getting her graduate degree at UConn's renowned puppet arts program and serving as the longtime artistic director of the ONeill Theater Center's National Puppetry Conference each summer in Waterford. So sit back and enjoy going behind the curtain with us, or as Pam will tell us, it's really below the frame when you're talking about a camera. Here's where we hear imaginary applause as she magically unveils herself. And there she is. Hello, Pam.
Hi. Hi, Lori. How are you?
Well, welcome to La Grua.
Thank you so much.
And I'm going to start a little bit with Connecticut.
Okay.
And just a little bit of history for people, for those in the audience who are a little older. If we go back 50, 60 years, Rufus and Margot Rose were well-known puppeteers from Waterford, Connecticut. And they're the ones behind Howdy Doody, which I think most people have heard of kind of in the common vernacular. And they, in the mid-60s, helped George White found the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center, which of course is one of our cultural gems in our region. So puppets were there at the beginning. And then we did start a National Puppetry Conference there, which you've led for a number of years.
Right.
So why don't you go ahead and just start back the leaving Hawaii. I think when you were in college is when puppetry came into your life, and talk about that instance and then bring us to Connecticut, if you will.
Okay. My undergraduate degrees in dance and drama, emphasis on dance, mostly ballet and modern dance. And then during the summer, a man came to teach puppetry at the University of Hawaii, and he was coming from New York. And so in Hawaii, that was like, ooh, big deal, someone from New York, which is true, you know, coming to teach it.
It's a long way.
It's a long way, and it feels a little bit backwater out there some of the time. And so the man who came to teach puppetry was named Kermit Love. And Kermit Love was a very famous costume designer for many years before he got into puppets. And what he's best known for is designing and building the Snuffleupagus. He also built the Big Bird, and he was known for building these very large puppets. And he had a shop and a crew back on the East Coast in New York, actually, on West 4th. And he came to Hawaii to teach puppetry. And what he did for me, because here was, you know, I was dance and theater, actress, dancer. He taught me about the love of puppets, and he loved all forms of puppetry, not just the Muppet style, which is mostly what I make my living in. But he made me fall in love with it. And he was so charming and committed to this art form that I just had to know more. So after working with Kermit for that summer, I decided to go to the University of Connecticut. I was graduating from the University of Hawaii at that time. And so the University of Connecticut had a puppetry program. Now at that time, and this is in the late 70s, early 80s, there were only two universities that had programs. One was UCLA and the other was the University of Connecticut. And UCLA was focused on Asian styles of puppets, which is the Wayang Kulit or the Wayang Eclectic. And that I wanted a broader understanding of puppetry, which UConn was offering. And it was closer to New York, which is where the Muppets were based at that time, and Sesame Street was based, which it still is. And so I got here and started studying puppetry. And after I graduated, I sort of fumbled around and ended up going to an audition for Sesame Street and actually getting hired, which was pretty amazing. It was a wonderful experience overall.
Now, when I think about puppetry, and again, going back to people our age or older, kind of what was happening in the puppet world, we talked about Howdy Doody. I remember Sherry Lewis and Lamb Chop, and
Right.
Popo Gigio was on the Ed Sullivan Show, and Captain Kangaroo was a show. I'm wondering, as a woman, I mean, I know Sherry Lewis was out there. Were there many women doing puppetry?
No, not a lot. And it is still, there are much more women in it now. But like even Sesame Street, we strive very hard to keep an equal amount of women and men on the program. But for many years, I was basically the only woman on Sesame Street for probably 7 or 8 years. Fran Brill would come in and do Prairie Dawn, but she would leave. But I was in there day in, day out, performing on Sesame Street for many, many years, the only woman.
Interesting. Yeah. And another name that we know, of course, is on the other side, and that's Jim Henson, who passed away far too young, and it's probably been, what, 30 years? So I assume you got to work with him and
yes.
met him. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the first 8 years I was on Sesame Street, Jim was still alive. And so he would show up. He was doing a lot of things at that time. And he did Sesame Street probably 3 or 4 weeks a year. And at that time, we did 110 shows, which is a lot of shows. So I would be shooting from roughly September through February on Sesame Street. And Jim would come in periodically, and he'd do what we call Muppet inserts, which are the specialty characters like Bert and Ernie or Kermit the Frog. The rest of the time we were sort of in the trenches, puppeteers doing, Big Bird was there every day, the Count was there every day, but there were specialty characters that were Jim, and Frank Oz too would come in at that time. And that's also, like I said, Fran Brill would come in and also do Prairie Dawn just for those short insert times. But they were wonderful times. Jim really was a genius. I've met a couple of people I believe are true geniuses, and it's almost like when you're near them, a bell goes off. There's just something about their energy and about the way they think of things. And Jim was always thinking of other things, even while we were working. I remember one day we were all waiting around for lighting, most likely, which is what you wait for a lot on television. And he had us all get together and put our hands together and make faces with our hands and do this kind of thing. And he was formulating an idea, and that did eventually show up. I believe it's in the movie Labyrinth, where they fall down a well, and the well is all hands. And it was this simple thing that we had started doing while we were waiting for the cameras to roll that he put together and eventually ended up in the film as a well of hands trying to grab her and talking to her and changing faces, becoming faces and winking. And it was quite interesting. And his brain was always going. It was fascinating to work with him. And wonderful.
An amazing man. And his family still support the ONeill a great deal. And I know you are on the foundation named for him. Talk about those early years at the ONeill, or what you're aware of. I mean, you weren't there, but I'm sure you've heard the stories, how the Hensons came
up. Apparently in the early days, Rufus and Margot Rose were the original builders of the marionette, and that's a type of puppet, a string puppet, a marionette, of Howdy Doody. Now, they didn't perform him necessarily, but they built and Margot designed him. So that whole look And they did it in Waterford, Connecticut. In Waterford, they had a beautiful house that was a studio and a performance space. And their son, Jim Rose, actually still is with us, and he comes every year to teach marionette building at the ONeill Puppetry Conference that we have each year. At that time, they, when George White rescued what is now the ONeill Center from it was going to be burned as part of a fire department practice, because the buildings were dilapidated and not well used. George White put his mind to it. He got the funding. He encouraged them. He wanted to build a place for basically playwrights and theater people to come during the summer and work without the pressures of New York. So George started that, and he wanted puppets somehow to be involved. So Margot and Rufus were helping to shovel out the barns and clean it all up. And Jim and Jane Henson came up one weekend, and they also helped clean the ONeill and help it get ready to be a theater center. And in fact, the barn, the performance barn that we have there now, is called the Margot and Rufus Rose Performance Barn. It's named after them. So puppetry has a lot of roots in the ONeill from the very, very beginning. Yeah.
I love that. That's a wonderful story. Let's go back to Sesame Street again and just talk about the name character that you're most recognized for is Grundgetta, who is not a day-to-day character. I think she's more a featured. Tell us about Grundgetta, her character, how you came to know her, and where we are with her.
Okay, so Grundgetta is a Grouch, and she is Oscar's significant other. We were going to get married, but we thought it might make us happy. And as you know, Grouches don't really like to be happy. So we decided not to get married, but she later came to regret that because she found out that most people are not happily married, and they would have been totally great together. Nonetheless, she stays separately. She has a kind of tough voice. It's something like, well, I have my own condominium. You got to understand, we don't live together or anything. We're just really good friends. Oscar and I are really good friends. And she's a Grouch girl. She likes, grouchy things. And like Oscar, they both have really good hearts. They have hearts of gold. The grouchiness just sort of covers what's under there. And one of the things I love about having Grouches on Sesame Street is that not everybody is happy, happy, sweet, sweet. It adds that drama, that interest, and that it's a type of diversity, really. If you think about it, there are people who are always happy and there are people who are always grumpy. I mean, there's always the ER in the room, it's just the way it goes. So I actually inherited the character. A man named Brian Meal had done her for 1 year, for one season, just a few shows. And then they decided that they indeed wanted it to be performed by a woman. So I came in and I was lucky enough to get her. The audition process was quite interesting because what I do is so challenging, what we do on television. It's hard to know how to do it unless you do it. And so it's sort of, you have to have experience, but you only get experience by doing it. And then you're in a studio with lots of lights and people, and it can be very high pressure. So the way they trained people at that time, and we still do to some extent, but this was a workshop / audition. And once a week for 4 months, I went in, and we started with 300 people, and they trained us. They had the camera set up. Now you got to remember, this is 1982, 83. Nobody had video cameras at home. Nobody had cell phones that you could turn on and record yourself. You had to have a lot of equipment to set it up to rehearse. Because one of the things that happens with us is on camera, the image is reversed. That's the first thing you have to learn. And there's a slew of technical things you learn about television, about the frame. We use this as our proscenium. All of that stuff has to be learned and then worked with. And we also, the puppets need to look directly at the camera. So you have to watch yourself on the monitor to get that direct look. Because if a puppet is looking off to the side like this, you think they're not paying attention. And so you have to really get the focus where you need it. And you can only do that on a monitor. So it takes a long time to learn that. And plus the technical difficulty, sometimes we work standing, sometimes we work sitting. We work sitting when we work with children on the set, and you have to learn to really work with your child actors and make sure, I mean, because we're always trying to make them look the best they possibly can. So there are so many levels to learning what we do that it takes quite a few years. I don't think anyone people do walk on the set thinking they're going to be great at this job, and you are not. It just takes a long time to learn what we do and do it well. I would say a minimum of really 5 years of being on camera, working with those, with all the people and the pressures and the directors. And we do 3 camera shoots, which is different than a 1 camera shoot. People who have their 1 video camera at home, yeah, you're doing a great job on that 1 video camera. But then when you have 3 cameras and they're cutting, and your focus has to be right on all 3 of those cameras. It's not like an actor where you're just going to shoot me. My puppet has to be looking. If you cut to me, my puppet's got to be looking down the barrel or at the object it's supposed to be looking at, or you don't believe it's alive. So, and then you have that addition of lip sync and movement and making the puppet look like it sits down when it sits down. So it is a very complicated, multi-level technique, and it takes a while to learn how to do it well. It really does.
So when people join the show, do they start in the more background characters as they develop these skills? I'm trying to think. Children's Theater Workshop, Sesame Street was 69, so it's been 50 years, I think. So I was too old for it myself, and I don't have kids or grandkids, so I probably know less about this than most of our viewers and people then. So how many main characters are there that most people would recognize their names, and then the rest are just depending on what the script is?
Yeah, we probably have, I want to say there's about 12 or 14 main characters. I mean, you can probably name them off. There's Cookie Monster, there's Grover, there's Ernie and Bert, there's Big Bird, there's Elmo, there's Abby Cadabby, there's Rosita, there's, gosh, I'm forgetting already, the Count, there's, I do part of Telly Monster, so I'm going to throw him in there.
Yeah, please.
There's, and then, you know, Oscar and Grundgetta. And so there's like a stable of characters that get used and called upon all the time. And then there's background characters who show up. They're dogs and frogs and cats and bats. The Count does a song. He's going to have 14 little bats flying around. Well, guess who's doing one or 2 or more of those 14 little bats in the background? That's the kind of job I do, or that's how we bring people up. Any puppet that has 2 hands, like Ernie, like the Count, like Oscar, like Grundgetta, has to have 2 puppeteers, because the puppeteer will have 1 hand in the head. The lead puppeteer does the voice and the 1 hand, and then he has this hand free to do all the gestures, but there still leaves a hand missing on this side. So the other puppeteer comes in and does that secondary hand. And that's quite a skill in itself, being able to not, you know, Cookie Monster is a classic 2-handed character as well. You know, in order for him to eat his cookies and not look like that hand is out there in outer space, it does take a while to click into who the puppeteer is, the lead puppeteer, and figure out how to make sure he doesn't look odd or doesn't look off. And also, you know, we work with our arms over our heads. So if you come in as a right hand and you weigh the puppet down, pretty much the other puppeteer is going to kill you, because it's hard enough to do what we do without the weight, the added weight of someone dragging you down. So there's lots of things you need to learn in terms of that. So a lot of times that is also a training ground for new puppeteers. We're doing what we call a mentor program right now, where we have, believe it's 6 mentees who come in. They do background, they do right hands, they get training. And so eventually they will end up as part of our crew, our regular team. There are 14 of us who are regular puppeteers on the show.
Okay, that helps give it some context.
Yeah, so there's 14 of us. Like next week, I'll be going in, I'll be assisting, Cookie Monster is in there. I'll either be assisting Cookie Monster or his buddy Gonger. Cookie Monster has a food truck now, and it's called Monster Foodies. And they talk about nutrition and where food comes from. And he has a chef sidekick named Gonger. And I'll probably be assisting Gonger, because they've got to carry. One of the things is when you do puppets, right? If you have a prop, you have to figure out how to carry it, especially if you just have little teeny skinny, like Grover, those skinny Roddy arms that are all floppy. So in order to carry a prop like an apple, say, very often we'll put it on a rod and it will go into the hand, and your right hand or your assist will handle that hand and rod and the apple so that it looks normal and it doesn't fall out and you can get it to go through the scene. It's terrible to do a perfect scene acting wise and hit all your marks and then have the apple fall off out of the hand and have to do the whole thing over for that darn apple. You know, so and that's part of the training. That's part of what we learn to do and how we learn to do it and why we learn to do it.
I have so many questions. Let's go back to the two people having to work on, I mean, the contortions you must have to go through because you have to be in close proximity. We'll get to COVID in a minute.
Yeah.
Talk about, I mean, you have to stay fit and you have to really, you talked about your training as a dancer and movement, the choreography that's behind the scenes to make it look so seamless to us watching. Talk a little bit about that and how you take care of yourself. I mean, at the end of the day, you're exhausted.
Yeah, I mean, the last 3 or 4 years, the Sesame company has been wonderful, and they send physical therapists in twice a week to help us work out knots. And because a lot of times we're under tables and crouched behind crates or walls and reaching up. But generally speaking, I'm fortunate. My dance background has helped me a lot. I always stretch out every day. I try to get physical exercise every day, and I lift weights pretty much every day or do some kind of, you know, arm training, because honestly, when we're out of season, like we've been, we literally have our arms straight up like this. If you can see, I'm synced down. That's how we do it. And it's up in the air for 8 or 10 hours a day.
Oh my God.
And this is an empty arm. You put a puppet on that and you have a whole different thing. And some puppets weigh more. You know, Big Bird is operated the same way, and he weighs, I think, only under 4 pounds, but still think about having 4 pounds at the top of your hand for 8 or 10 hours a day over your head. I did hear an interesting thing that puppeteers and orchestra conductors have very good hearts, generally speaking, because everything we do is above our head, and that apparently is good for your heart. I thought, oh, I have something
that's right
with an orchestra.
Aerobic. It's aerobic. Oh my God.
So yeah, so that's been a very interesting process for me. I've always strived to stay in shape anyway. Again, the dancing background, you just sort of do that. Otherwise, actually, I have a hard time getting out of bed if I don't stretch out. So. Yeah.
You have to, and I just don't think about that until you're talking about all those.
And actually, when you asked about Jim Henson, my first couple of weeks that I worked, I remember I was in New York City. Of course, we were shooting at that time at 9th Avenue and 55th. I remember going out to hail a cab, and I couldn't lift my arm because I was so tired. I was like, I was holding it like this to get a taxi because I wasn't in shape and my arm was just gone. You know? So, yeah.
You have one arm that's larger than the other? I mean,
well, we try not to do that, but I think that all of us do. If you were to do really exact measurements, I'm pretty sure all of us right-handed puppeteers have a slightly larger bicep than this area would be, because this muscle is all connected back in here, and that's how we do it. Yeah, I'm sure it'd be slightly larger, you know, slightly lifted or lower, depending on what's going on.
And again, kind of your dance background, you talk about sometimes you are doing some of the secondary directing of the walk-around characters, and choreography in the sense, I'm guessing, although I guess the Muppets could dance, but more choreography of the puppeteers to not kill each other while they're doing movements, or perhaps both?
Well, the walk-around characters are very different. Those are the great big characters you see in theme parks and resorts and different areas where they entertain. And so because what we've done is scaled, and they have the big dance shows, the arena shows, Sesame Street Live shows that tour the different arenas all over the country. And those characters, we actually usually have dancers inside of them. And my job, more or less, I do some of the choreography. I work with choreographers. And my job is really about making sure that the character moves like the character. Because you can get a really good dancer in a costume, and they're going to move up like, you know, Rudolph Nureyev. And that's great, but it doesn't look like Grover. So you have to remind them, you know, your arms are floppy and soggy, so you can do this, make yourself move a little bit this way. Or, you know, Ernie and Bert, for example, Ernie would be much more this way, and Bert's very stiff and tall, and so that's how he needs to move, even though he's doing the movements that we're directing them to do. The characterization of the dancer during those movements needs to be, you know, I'd like to keep track of that so we don't lose our characters. But the wonderful part about that is it has taken me pretty much all over the world to do directing for those particular things. The resorts in particular, I was in Barcelona at PortAventura. We have a franchise there. So I went and put a show in Barcelona, and it was just the best fun for 2 weeks. I mean, we took the siesta at 4 o'clock, and I was like, what, we're doing what? No, we have to rehearse. And they go, oh, no. This is what we're doing. And it was pretty fun to learn to work within other people's cultural, you know, activities in that way. And the other thing that was interesting in Spain, actually, is that their children are up very late. We had our opening show at 10 o'clock at night, the very first time we showed the show. And I said, 10 o'clock, this is for 2 and 3-year-olds. Are you kidding me? And they go, no, they'll be up. And they were. Well, the audience was full.
They had a good nap.
They have a nap. They have a nap. And they also don't eat dinner till 9 o'clock at night. So, I mean, it was just after dinner time for them. It was pretty interesting to work there. I've also been lucky enough to work in Turks and Caicos and Jamaica. We have resorts there. I do Sesame Place in Pennsylvania and SeaWorld in Florida. I've been pretty much all over helping to put those shows in. Saudi Arabia was the other big one that I went to.
Well, yeah, talk about that one, because we talked earlier about being a woman in an industry at the beginning that was pretty male dominated. Well, now you're in a culture where women can't drive, and yet you're the expert. Right. And the people you're teaching are young men, I believe. So
yes, right. In Saudi Arabia, women don't work. So this is very challenging. I think that's getting a little better now. This was about 5 years ago. I was in Saudi. I was originally in Jeddah, and I had 6 young men who were my characters. And we have a female character actually in the Middle Eastern cast for Sesame Street named Hoja. And she's quite out there and moving, and a mover and a shaker in terms of character. But what I would do is when I would choreograph or put a song in the show, if it had anything to do with driving, I always made sure Hoja was driving, because women couldn't drive at that time. So I always made sure that she was the one driving. So yes, I was being very subversive as far as the Saudi Arabian government goes. And then we had a Ernie and Bert driving class where they would go through this little game, this little, you know, series of events where they learn to put their seatbelt on right, and learn to, you know, use this, when they should have their car seat and all this stuff. And if they went through all the little adventures, at the end, they got a driver's license. So we were sending little girls home with driver's licenses to show their mom when moms couldn't drive, when women weren't allowed to drive. So we were kind of worried we might get shut down if they realized what we were doing, but nobody shut us down. It was fascinating. In Saudi Arabia, I had to wear a abaya, they call it there, and a headscarf in order to work with them. But once I was inside the studio, because it wasn't a public place, I could take that off and work with them as I normally would, you know, in khakis and a t-shirt kind of thing. But it was,
goodness, that would have been kind of hard to.
Yeah, and actually Big Bird's costume, the bottom of the costume ripped out and wasn't staying in place. And so I was in a public place. So I had to hang up the Big Bird costume, crawl underneath it in this abaya and this headscarf, and try and stitch this whole thing together from, I was like, oh my God, it was so hard. All I could think of is, why are these people thinking this is a good idea? You know, and the women were wonderful. The women I did work with and talk to there were just amazing women, but they were in this culture where they were quite restrained, everything they did, you know.
That's interesting when you think about Sesame Street having an international footprint over these 50 years, and what that can be a part of a cultural exchange. And that even leads me back to, you know, the scripts. I mean, the Muppets and Sesame Street have been around for so long. It seems to me like that would be very rewarding to do the kind of work that's so educational for young people and the kind of messaging you can do with the characters and the storylines. Talk a little bit about that and how the scripts come about. Do you guys as performers improvise or contribute to that, or it's all writing and you memorize them, you have cue cards? How does this work?
Well, generally speaking, we know how our characters will say something, but there's a slew of very talented writers who write for us. And then all of those scripts go through research. So improving is not really allowed because there's a chance we'll go off the research, or we'll go off topic, or it'll be inappropriate. And actually they have a feedback to their offices, and they let us know when we step away from the script, and they go, no, you can't say that. You can't use that word. For example, there's some words that they don't want us necessarily to use. So we're fairly careful, but the way we do our scripts is we are given scripts and we tape them up around the monitor. So they are right there on either side. Here's our monitor, here's a script on either side. Most of the time we have them semi-memorized, at least I do, so that I don't have to really look at the script, but the script is there as a security blanket and you go back and forth. Because you have to be paying attention to what the puppet is doing or looking at, or how the puppet is moving. Paying attention to the script is really down low on the list. That really what you need to do is know that script well enough to get lost from it and then be able to go back and find where you are. But pretty much all of us will put our scripts up. And also because we do a lot of shows. And we do a lot of, time in the can. It's hard to memorize that many things that quickly and be thinking about your character and be wondering where the song's coming in next and all of that. So it's a luxury we have that works very well for us. Our actors, on the other hand, really do have to memorize. But generally speaking, we do it kind of the day of because things change all the time. The prop may not work out that was written in. They can't carry this big bowl, so now it's a little bowl. So the reference to big and little is changed. So there are changes that happen quite a bit of the time when we work.
Are there any particular storylines or messages that you really found moving or really affected you in terms of, there's so much educational work going on about children with disabilities, for instance, or gender issues, or like you said, even happy, sad, grouchy. It's okay to be grouchy. Yeah. Anything in particular that you can reflect upon that?
Well, from the way back, we did a show on death with Mr. Hooper, and that was very sad. That was before my time, but when I thought that puppets could handle that talking about why someone is never coming back, it was very powerful for me. And recently we just did an outreach video on homelessness and food insecurity, and those two things, being able to approach it and helping children to understand that home is where your family is, home is where you love. It's not a building, it's not a place. Home can be anything. That was very, very moving. And the other thing I've done recently, to my delight, was I was in South Africa helping to reboot a new show, Takalani Sesame. We've been in South Africa for many years. The last time they actually recorded shows there in South Africa, in Johannesburg, was 16 years ago. So I went back to help the puppets get back on their feet and retrain them and do all of that. And that was just a delight. So being able to reach out, and that show is broadcast in 4 languages, and to be amongst all these amazing people who speak way more than 4 languages. That's the minimum most of them speak. Wow. And English is always one of them, fortunately for me. So that was a way that I thought the scripting and the messaging that they were putting out there about being, they have big issues, obviously, with racism there. Even with apartheid being gone, it still doesn't mean it's gone. It's like here, there's still a lot of underground racism, and there's not so underground. You really have segregated areas of Joburg. So that to me has been incredibly powerful, and I'm incredibly grateful to help move the needle a little, even the teeniest bit in those kind of areas has really been a gift for me to be working with this company and these puppets.
Let's go back to a little bit of and I think you have a little bit of show and tell in terms of creating a character. You spoke of Grundgetta, someone else had created it. You came in pretty early on.
Yeah.
You create a voice and some physicality. You talk
Right.
about, you know, this puppet moves this way and that. Could you talk about that? And even, I think you said you might have somebody you can show us a little bit of the insides and how that relation kind of.
Yes, sure. So one of the things you end up doing is teaching. I mean, that is what I've ended up doing anyway. And I've been very lucky to have taught both manipulation, specific manipulation, and general puppetry. And I've taught at the Hong Kong Academy of Performing Arts. I've taught at the Taiwan National University of the Arts. I have taught in Madrid and just pretty much all over the world, all over the US too. And that's part of the ONeill. Part of the ONeill is teaching people about the different forms of puppetry. So basically there are 5 forms of puppetry. And they are marionette, which we talked about, that Howdy Doody was a marionette. You mentioned Lamb Chop, and she's this kind of puppet. She's a soft puppet, basically. But Sherry Lewis made her very well known. Topo Gigio is a hand puppet, a glove puppet. You have rod puppets, puppets that are controlled by rods, and you have shadow puppets, which is very big in Asian cultures. There's many more shadow puppet shows, and it was big in France in the 1800s as well. But so let me show you a couple of things. So the style of puppet, we call it a hand and rod, the lip sync puppet, which is what we do. So this is a little froggy character. Hello. And he's just basically, he would normally have a rod. His rod fell off as soon as I picked him up just now, but his rod would be here. So that's the hand and rod.
Yep.
Can't believe I dropped my rod.
Oh,
but
dear.
he's very little. You can see he's just, that's it. You put your hand in, and there's a mouth, and there I am. And that's who I am. So he's one of my, a dear friend of mine created him for another show that we didn't have. And then we have another one of those who was from, I did a show called Blues Clues, Blues Room. And we built puppets from the blues. And this is Polka Dots, who has great ear movement. So a lot of times you're looking for a character who has ear movement. And he was very small, so his voice was like this: polka dots, polka dots, polka dots. Hello, Blue. He's tiny, see? He's a little guy. My head is big. Yeah, it is. So that's that. Now, a rod puppet is a puppet that has a rod in it. And this is a rod puppet chicken I have. The rod controls her head. She doesn't speak, really. She clucks occasionally. But you can see there are just 2 rods. One goes in her body. This one goes in her neck. And then that controls where she looks, and she can also extend her neck a great deal. So this is a type of rod puppet. And then I have another rod puppet, which was built and designed by Jim Krupa, who is a wonderful puppet builder and teaches at the ONeill for us. And this little guy he has a rod here, and there are controls, as you can see. Now, one of these controls his mouth. Yep. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. And this back control controls his eyes. What? No cookies? Yeah, I'm out of here. Come on. And that we build at the ONeill. We have an intensive building class, and that's kind of the stuff that we will build in 3 or 4 days at the start of the conference. So,
well, that's one of the things too. As a teacher and the puppetry conference, talk about that and a little bit of how you did it this year in the year of COVID, and how Sesame Street's going to deal with it, going back to work, and what kinds of things, new challenges you're going to have. New
challenges. So the National Puppetry Conference at the ONeill Theater Center is normally roughly a 2-week event. The first week there's an intensive conference, which is 3 or 4 days, sometimes 5, depending on what the course is. And you do only that one thing. Like I said, we built that puppet, just that one puppet gets built in that 3-day period. Or we'll have someone who teaches design, and they will teach you just about designing puppets. Or we have someone coming in who is going to teach you about how to do a film, and maybe they'll take 5 days and do a puppet film during that time. You don't do anything else. The second part of the main conference is the main conference, and that is 8 days from a Saturday to a Sunday. And we teach usually about 5 different strands, and it'll be something like we'll have marionette building and marionette performance. There'll be someone who's going to do a shadow sequence, so you'll learn shadow puppetry. So there's 4 or 5 strands you can be in. And at the end of the weekend, we have public performances, so people come to see what we've created during that time. This year, of course, we couldn't do that. So no one was going to the theater in June. It's usually the first 2 weeks of June or 3 weeks of June, 1 or 2 in that time frame. So we had to reinvent it. And I was fortunate enough to have my associate, Jean Marie Keevens, who kept saying to me in March, when we first shut down, when things were first shutting down, we got to figure out how to do this online. And I'm like, yeah, it's June. We're going to go. Don't worry about it. This will blow over. It's June. This is March. Well, lo and behold, she said, let's just do it. So we started to plan. And we did a 5-day online Zoom conference. We had about, I want to say 45, 50 participants. Wow. We had 10 to 12 guest artists who were helping the workshops move along. One of them was from Germany. Alice Baum always teaches movement and material. She's a fabulous German puppeteer. She actually started teaching at, I believe it was 4 in the afternoon and taught till midnight. We started the conference at 11 in the morning and went till 11 at night. Wow. And well, 10, I think we shut down at 10. And so we had all these different events, just like we would in a normal conference, where we get together and talk to each other and let each other know what's going. And in some ways, the Zoom was fun because I could check into each of the rooms pretty easily and see what was going on. We had someone teaching writing. We had, they created individual films with Edwin Salas. We, we had a full complement of a conference, but it was on Zoom, and it was fascinating how it worked. And I think most people were pretty happy, but it was 5 extremely intensive days. We ended it, as we always do, with a show and tell for the whole conference. And then for the public, we have a pub on campus, and every night we do open night pub shows. So we did a big finale pub show that last night, which was lots and lots of fun. And we always have a dance party. So one of our previous alumni created a dance party room. So people were actually dancing till 2 o'clock in the morning. It was very fun. It was almost like a real conference. Well, it was a real conference. It was just different.
That's what creativity and that's what artists can do. Most of the rest of us might not be that creative, but artists, yeah.
Well, the other thing that happens is puppeteers who are not working in television the way I am, we tend to be kind of solo artists. We work kind of alone. So one of the things I really like to create at the ONeill is a sense of community. Not only are you learning and creating, but you're meeting other people who have the same interests as you. And as you can imagine, not that it's better now, but it's pretty hard to find a group of puppeteers just sort of wandering the streets. It's not like you really have to seek them out. So this enables us to connect and have a lot of resources, like someone who's a shadow puppet expert, and you've decided that you're doing a new show that needs shadows. Well, we can connect you to someone who really knows how to make those shadows live and breathe in a way that maybe you hadn't thought of. Or, you've decided you're building a marionette. Well, that's a very complicated thing to do. We know someone who can help you figure out how to string it so the balance is good. And then you can, the resource is connecting with that person. Or you've connected with a writer who understands how to write for puppets, which is a very different process than writing for actors. It's also very freeing. Actors generally don't fly very well. Guess what? Puppets fly like crazy. So, and puppets can die.
Yeah.
And really be dead. Like you pull your hand out, that puppet is gone. And so you can create these impactful moments that you probably couldn't create necessarily with a human actor. So as writers understand what we can do with puppets and drama and comedy, it's great to have those writers on tap to create art for, works of art for us to perform.
This might be a good time now to bring in, you have a special friend with you who might
yes, I do.
Help us visualize a little bit of what you're talking about there.
Hang on, I got a put her on. Let's
Take
see.
your time. We're here. And we know she's, oh.
Okay, it's about time, Lori. I
Ooh,
thought you were ignoring me.
oh
That's
no.
not true.
I'm so
Hi,
sorry.
Lori.
Are you Leona?
I am Lola the Lion. I grew up in a library that's on a show called Between the Lions. Some of my favorite moments. So, yeah, and I love reading. Even though I'm only 4 and can't quite read, I am learning.
That's wonderful.
That's what I want to do. I want to learn to read.
I love it. You're a lion. My sun's sign, I'm a Leo the lion. So I love lions.
Me too. And get it, the show was called Between the Lions, and it was a library.
I know.
Just like in
libraries
New
are the most
York.
wonderful places in the world.
They are my favorite.
I bet you help children learn how to read and love reading.
Yep, that was the plan. And I got to go all over. I traveled not only on the show, but they sent us all over to libraries to talk to kids about how to keep reading. It was great.
That is the best thing ever. I love hearing that. I'm so glad.
Yeah,
and you've been friends with Pam a long time, haven't you?
Yeah, I think it's been, I don't know, since something like 80 shows. I don't know. It's been a lot of years. I'm only 3. I can't remember time.
Of course. Well, that's understandable. You can't be expected to know all that.
Oh.
Yeah, it's about 12 years maybe.
Okay. And is that a show that's still on?
No, unfortunately. No, not anywhere.
In reruns?
Yeah, not even in reruns. I don't know. You know, sometimes PBS shows just kind of float away. But it's, I think on YouTube you can see some of them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I might want to do that. Well, thank you for coming on with us. I'm sorry you had to wait so long.
I know. I was getting worried you were going to forget about me.
No way. No way.
No.
Well,
So nice to meet you.
Coming. I'm going to talk to Pam again.
They always want to talk to her.
Will you say bye-bye?
All right. Bye.
Bye, Leona.
Bye-bye. Love ya.
Bye-bye.
Get back down here. Ugh.
And I'm just transported. And this is the audience thing too. It's just like, I'm so fascinated by the puppet. I'm not paying attention to you unless I really am deliberate about what's the puppeteer doing.
Right.
That's what you want.
And yes, and actually the interesting thing is people always go, oh, you can't be next to the puppet when a kid comes up. The minute the puppet is present, the kid doesn't see me anymore. They don't even care about what I'm doing or what's going on.
I didn't know what to do when I saw The Lion King on Broadway and the performers came down the aisle.
Right.
I was weeping, but it was just like, oh my God, I was just so fascinated by it. But I had to split my focus because like, how are they doing that?
Yeah, right. That does happen a little bit. Yeah.
So much.
Yeah. With the Muppet style characters though, kids seem to get really sucked in. And most puppet characters, if the character is strong enough, the kids don't really care about what you're doing or how you're making it work. That is a much more grown up sort of part of your brain trying to figure that stuff out. They're much more about enjoying the experience of being with whoever the character is, especially if it's a well-known one like Elmo, like Abby, like, you know.
Indeed. I'm going to pause for a moment, invite Kelly to join us and see if we have any questions from the audience, since, of course, I could always go on forever. Here comes Kelly.
Hello, everyone. It's a little dark here for me. Let's see, do we have any questions? You can type them into the Q&A. And while we're waiting, I have a question for you, Pam. When a character is retired or a show is canceled,
you froze.
do you adopt them or do they, what?
It's different with every show. Some characters like Leona, they have been kind enough to let me take care of her so that I can continue to do a few things here and there. I will do benefits. I will do outreach with her. Technically, she belongs to the show. The show Blues Room, Blues Clues was another one, which I have a company and we built the puppets and I have them all upstairs in my attic right now. You know, they're basically, I'm taking care of them. Should anything ever happen again, then for sure I will have them at least good enough and repaired enough to make an appearance of some kind. Very often with puppets after, 10 years, 12 years, they start to deteriorate. So you do
okay.
have to maintain them. They don't last forever. This style in particular, the foam starts to get soft, it crumbles, seams rip, they get dirty. So you do need to take care of them. Sort of our fear is that you build a puppet for the show goes on for 2 years and then it's done. And then it ends up in somebody's office collecting dust, or their kids play with it and rip it to pieces. And these puppets start at about $10,000 to be created.
My gosh.
And they
Wow.
move up from there. They're very expensive investments. The people doing it are very talented and very qualified. And the materials are expensive, and the amount of time it takes to build a puppet like that. So you really don't want to see that happen. So we tend to sort of guardian them.
Right.
And eventually I think what will happen with some of my other puppets, other shows, I hope will go. The Ballard Museum up at UConn does have a fair amount of collections of people's puppets. And, it is a question of where does the puppet go when it's retired. And that's very interesting, actually. Ventriloquist dummies. There's a place called Vent Haven where ventriloquist dummies are retired, and they all sit in chairs in this big room. And they're never worked again. There's a little placard that has the name of the ventriloquist and what the character's name was, but they just sit there. Of course, they're made of wood, so they last much longer.
Right.
As a corollary to that, Pam, what happens to Muppet succession if one artist, how you learn to take over a well-known character from another artist when they might move on for whatever reason? How does that happen?
Usually, again, we have mentor that we're training along the way. And the person who does, for instance, Carol Spinney passed away this past year. And Matt Vogel, who now does Big Bird, was picked by Carol maybe 10 or 12 years ago. And he started training him to do the character. So we're at the point where lots of us are getting older. So you start to figure out who can do it. And with Matt, it started out, and there's another person, Noel McNeil, who also will do Big Bird some of the time as well. And he's quite good. But like Matt would we used to do the lighting of the Christmas tree at Lincoln Center every year. And so Carol, when he was in his 70s, said, I don't want to do this anymore at 70 years old on December 14th in the freezing cold, standing outside for 5.5 hours while you get ready and you do the thing, right? So Matt would go in and do it. And that's kind of how you train in. You slowly get in there. And the same with the Count. Jerry Nelson also chose Matt. Matt's quite a puppeteer. He's also Kermit the Frog. So he was chosen and he was trained to do all of these characters. Jim, because Jim died so quickly, Kermit's got a little more checkered past in that people auditioned and were trained in. Steve Whitmire took him over for a long time. There's been, a few changes in that area. Not too many puppeteers have died unexpectedly, really. So they've been able to, at least in terms of the Muppets, and been able to pick and choose who goes in. With Sesame, it's been the producers of Sesame Street and the people, the Henson folk have gotten together and figured out who the best replacement will be when someone needs to be replaced. So that's kind of
we have a question from Mateo. He asks, are there any key moments in your performance career that you'd like to think back on?
Key moments in my performance career. Well, I have to say, working with Jim is always going to be a wonderful memory. He was so much fun. I did Kermit the Frog's elbows in a song called I Love My Elbows. So that's very, very memorable for me. I was working his elbows, Kermit singing. There was a show we did where I was assisting Kermit again, and we were laying out on 9th Avenue in November on the ground because Kermit was interviewing cars going by. And, so things like that are just the most fun memories to have. And the other wonderful thing about Between the Lions was, and this was memorable and so moving, was we were actually shooting one of the seasons down in Mississippi at the time of Hurricane Katrina. And Katrina hit, and within 3 weeks, we did a tour of the ravaged areas. And these were kids who had lost everything in it, and they were in school again. And the teachers were nervous, and we came in and we did a whole show song about reading and talked to all the kids and gave them hugs and let them go. And the teachers came to us crying, saying, you know, they haven't laughed or smiled this whole time they've been in school, and now they do because you've come in and done that. So things like that. I did 3 tours of the Katrina area with her, 3 weeks out, 6 weeks out, and 6 months out. So you get to see sort of the results of cheering these kids on and seeing them move on with their lives. And I've had a number of really wonderful experiences in that way, that you feel like what you're doing really makes a huge difference. And that's the best part of what I do.
And it does. And that's a wonderful way to leave our talk, and the transformation powers of the arts. And what you talked with us about puppetry. I thank our audience for being with us tonight. And most of all, I thank you, Pam, for giving us just a really joyful hour, and so interesting and informative and fun. And give our best to Leona. We're so glad she could join you.
Yeah, she likes coming out of her box. Thank you. It's been so much fun.
It was a blast. Thank you, everyone. And
See you later. Good night.